Hello, and welcome back to Through the Big Book with Dr. Ben. My name is Ben, and I'm an alcoholic. We will be picking up on page XXIX, which is Roman numeral 29, in the doctor's opinion. And with me today again is my good friend Jim B. from Tulsa. And so before we get started again, I just wanted to, I'm assuming that you're watching these in order. And so I'm asking questions, does that sound like that's happened to you before? Does that sound familiar? And the reason why I do that is because I was taught that it's our duty as sponsors to help people to have a first step experience. It's really easy for people to just, say, oh, I'm an alcoholic because I'm in trouble or whatever the case may be. But, the fact is that Alcoholics Anonymous to me is a lifestyle, and it requires quite a bit of time and sacrifice and stuff. And if none of this stuff sounds familiar to you, you may not be an alcoholic, and you don't need to go through all this stuff. But if it does, you're helping to find yourself in this book, and therefore hopefully to accept that you are an alcoholic, or as they say now, alcohol use disorder. You have alcohol use disorder, which is neither here nor there. But that's why we go through that stuff. And so it may feel annoying for me to keep asking you, does this sound familiar to you? Has that happened to you? But that's why we're doing it, is so you can find yourself in this book.
Correct.
And so before we move on to the next paragraph, Jim's going to help unpack a little bit more on what we discussed in the previous episode.
Thank you. Again, I said, as I read this paragraph, I'm telling my story, and I'm hoping that you also can relate to it. If you want to, when it says men and women or they, just put it in the first person and put in the word I there,
Sure.
just to see if you can relate to it, because I know I can. But anyway, it says here, as we read, that I'm restless, irritable, and discontented unless I can again experience a sense of ease and comfort, which comes by taking a few drinks, which I saw those take with impunity. After I had succumbed to the desire again, and so many do, and the phenomenon of craving would develop, here I love this, I'd pass through the well-known stages of a spree. I'd emerge remorseful with a firm resolution never to drink again.
Never doing it ever again.
Boss, I promise you I'll be back here on Monday. I'll do you a great job.
Promise.
Promise. Honey, I promise you if you let me back in the house, this will never happen again.
I mean it.
And mean every word of it. And then, Judge, you'll never see me back in this courtroom again, and mean every word of it.
Cross my heart.
But please look at this next sentence.
Yep.
This is repeated over and over. And unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there is very little hope of their recovery. And this is why I emphasize this so much. You go to a meeting, and you go to a beginner meeting, and a person will even introduce themselves as a alcoholic, and I'm a chronic relapser. And somebody across the room will say, I relapse more than you do. And then somebody will say, well, I've been to 12 and 12 4 times. I've been there 8 times. Who gives a rat's ass? Period.
For our listeners, I just want you to know I'm holding back my laughs because I've seen this so many times.
Seriously. No, but the point is, and this is what all I can do is share with you my experience.
Sure.
That until a person has worked the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous with a sponsor out of a book called Alcoholics Anonymous, you have absolutely nothing to relapse from. Because we're going to talk about here in a minute about the entire psychic change.
That's a great point.
You never had the entire psychic change. We only get that only as a result of working the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. You do not relapse. You resume. Period. All you do is resume because you've never had the entire psychic change.
That's a great point,
That what we talked about. Because it says here in the next paragraph, on the other hand, and strange may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems he despaired of resolving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol. Now look at this. Look at this. The only effort necessary is that being required to follow a few simple rules.
Which is just the steps.
Exactly. And the fact is, see, a lot of times you hear around the fellowship, there's no must in AA. There's no must. Well, I just read 2. Require.
Yeah.
There's the word must.
Yeah.
What does it say? Necessary. There's the word must. Synonyms for must.
And
the point is, when we read this and know this, that suddenly he finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol. The only effort necessary is that being required to follow a few simple rules. Remember, Dr. Silkworth, who wrote this portion of the book, he was a contributor to the book. He was not an alcoholic. He called them rules. In AA, we call them steps. Wow.
Then it says, men have cried out to me in sincere and despairing appeal, Doctor, I can't go on like this. I have everything to live for. I must stop, but I cannot. You must help me. Faced with this problem, if a doctor is honest with himself, he must sometimes feel his own inadequacy. Although he gives all that's in him, it's often not enough. One feels that something more than human power is needed to produce the essential psychic change. Though the aggregate of recoveries resulting from psychiatric effort is considerable, we physicians must admit that we've made little impression upon the problem as a whole. Many types do not respond to the ordinary psychological approach.
You know, in reading this, you go back to Dr. Jung, when Roland Hazard went to see Dr. Jung.
And this is from Bill's story.
Correct.
Everybody.
Right. And the point is that, or actually, there was a solution, but also in Bill's story.
Right.
You know, but when you go when you go back to Dr. Jung, and when Roland Hazard, visited him, Roland was there studying under the most prolific psychiatrist in the world at the time, him and Dr. Freud.
Yeah.
And finally, after 2 years, and him quote relapsing, the point is that Dr. Jung said, "Hey, I can't do anything for you. It's going to have to be something greater than you, greater than me."
Yeah.
And so the point is that now Dr. Silkworth is saying the same thing. It's going to have to be something greater than me.
More than human power.
That's right.
So then he goes on to say, I don't hold with those who believe that alcoholism is entirely a problem of mental control. I've had many men who, for example, worked a period of months on some problem or business deal which was to be settled on a certain date favorably to them. They took a drink a day or so prior to the date, and then the phenomenon of craving at once became paramount to all other interests, so that the important appointment was not met. I got to ask, to the listener, does that sound like something familiar to you?
Exactly.
It says these men were not drinking to escape, they were drinking to overcome a craving beyond their control. And, just a quick thing out of my experience, I've had final exams where that I was prepared for, that I was totally prepared for, and I was ready to finish up the semester strong. And, the night before somebody, was moving to California the next day or something, you want to go have a beer and send them off. It's like, well, yeah, sure, of course, we'll go have a beer because that's all it really ever is for everybody else.
That's right.
But the thing is when I went out with him, I drank all night long that night.
That's right.
And so I showed up. I think I talk about this same story in our Bill's Story podcast, but, I stayed up all night drinking and etc. and showed up to that final sweating like I was trying to break a flu, with a bunch of 4-hour energies to take this final. Obviously I did not perform very well in that final, and I left my microbiology course with a C. But, that's what happens. It doesn't matter how important something is to me. Once I have one beer in my system, it is absolutely paramount to all other things in my life.
Exactly.
So that'll wrap up part 5 of Doctor's Opinion. Next, we'll be moving on in the Doctor's Opinion. So thanks for joining. God bless you.